Welcome back. Take a look at futures. A big rally underway right here. Dow Industrial's up 314 right now, almost 1%. The Nasdaq's up 118. That's 0.2%. And the S&P higher by 20 points. Going into the jobs numbers this morning, interest rates also pulling back. Take a look at the 10-year Treasury this morning, down about 1 basis point at 4.57%. The Wall Street Journal writing that inflation and mounting U.S. debt boosting yields and squeezing the Treasury market. Meanwhile, we'll get the April jobs report out this morning at 8:30 a.m. Eastern. Economists are expecting 243,000 non-farm payroll jobs added to the economy in the month of April, with the unemployment rate holding steady at 3.8%. Joining me now is Brig McAdam, LTD founder partner, Greg Swenson. Greg, great to see you. Thanks very much for being here this morning. We've had 3 straight months of elevated inflation. We've had growth in the economy slowing to 1.6%. Which was all worse than expected. But the jobs numbers are expected to be pretty strong today. What are your expectations?
Yeah, I'm not sure I really care that much about the number because so much of it is driven by government expansion and the expansion of the state in the economy. So, and you saw that in the last few job numbers. You saw, significant expansion in government jobs, healthcare jobs, which is basically government driven. So I'm not sure that the numbers matter that much. And then you have to look at the supply side. The Treasury has to issue 10 trillion plus in bonds this year. They're doing most of it on the short end. So I'm not sure that the employment number is as important as it used to be.
Yeah, it's interesting that you're saying the auctions are going to be mostly on the short end because it's that issue, the way that the Treasury Secretary, Janet Yellen, has put these auctions, which is said to be political because she's trying to keep yields down and stocks up going into the election. The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, says that the UK is going to suffer the slowest yearly GDP growth of all advanced nations, expecting an overall growth of 0.4% in 2024. We're going to hear from the Bank of England next week on its path toward an interest rate cut. Greg, what do you expect there, and what about the Fed?
Yeah, I think the bank, the BOE, the Bank of England, can cut sooner than the Fed because of the economic slowdown in the UK as well as in the Eurozone. So, but I think that the UK is a great example of what happens when the state is hostile to the private sector, and you're seeing that from the Biden administration for sure, but you've seen it, ironically, from the Conservative Party. The party of the right in the UK has been hostile to the private sector. It's only going to get worse with Labour coming in later this year. So, price caps, windfall taxes, fracking ban, net zero, all the things that Biden could only dream of. The UK, again, the party of the right has put these policies in place, and it's been very hostile to economic growth and the private sector in general.
Yeah, I mean, you could see the impact of all of that, right, in plain sight. Let me get back to Janet Yellen and all her politicking, Cheryl, because the Treasury Secretary is headed to Arizona today. As you know, she'll speak at the McCain Institute. She'll have a warning about the, quote, economic dangers presented by the January 6th style attacks on American institutions. An excerpt from her speech goes this way. I believe that democracy is critical to building and sustaining a strong economy. Undercutting democracy undercuts a foundation of sustainable and inclusive growth. Treasury secretaries really get political, as you know, and right. Here we have her basically attacking Trump in a speech that she's expected to give today.
And the embargo on her comments lifted about 15 minutes ago, Maria, and I'm just now reading through the entire comments from Yellen, and she brings up January 6th in this address in Sedona that she is giving today, and she says January 6th was an example of democracy coming under threat. These are very, very strange, I will say that, words coming from a Treasury Secretary. This is not in the norm of what we normally would hear when it comes to any comments from the Treasury Secretary. Let's talk about the banking system. Let's talk about regulation, but not this. And that's just my opinion. But she also talks about the fact, and she acknowledges that this is not typical terrain for a Treasury Secretary. But still, the decision to make these comments and to go in this direction screams political, Maria. And I think that's inappropriate for a Treasury Secretary.
Mm-hmm. What do you say, John?
Well, I'd say this reminds us this is an election year, and quite frankly, the economy is not doing so well that Janet Yellen wants to bring attention to the economy. She'd rather go ahead and speak about January 6th and whatever threat to democracy that presented.
Yeah, I mean, and it's also, Greg, the way she's setting up these auctions. is also being criticized by lots of people on Wall Street.
Yeah, absolutely. Why would she be, borrowing on the short end of the curve when rates are actually lower out the curve? And this is clearly, and it's also, it's taking away from small business. It's basically competing with small business borrowing, and that is clearly political. It's an election year, as John pointed out, and so she's lost credibility and continues to lose credibility. It started with the transitory comments last year.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Real quick before you go, what do you want to do in terms of stocks here? You mentioned it's an election year, Greg. Does that shift the way you want to allocate capital?
It does. I mean, it's hard to ignore the short end of the curve. Why would you take excess risk in equities if you can borrow, and if you can invest in 2-year treasuries at 5%. So I think it's going to be somewhat of a headwind on equities, but the economy is continuing to grow, and that's driven by government spending. So it's just not sustainable.
Yeah, a lot of government spending there. That's the tsunami of spending that Jay Powell has been dealing with, and probably one of the reasons inflation is still elevated. Greg, great to see you this morning. Thank you, sir.
Great to be here. Thanks.